Today's video is all about the songs the Beatles wrote for each other after they disbanded. Some loving, some reminiscent, and some downright scolding. The Beatles' solo careers provided for a unique opportunity for the band members to publicly wish each other well, criticize their music choices, and remember the days when they was fat. From How Do You Sleep all the way to Here Today, we're going to show you the songs the Beatles wrote for each other. Let's do it. Right out of the gate, before we get into the story of How Do You Sleep, we have to start at the first diss track that came from Paul McCartney. We begin with Paul McCartney's album, Ram. In there was a few digs at John as Paul was becoming critical of John's activism, labeling it a bit preachy and elitist. John and Yoko at the end of the Beatles and after, literally till the day he died, together fought for their ideas on politics, religion, freedom of speech, as John utilized his fame and social power to instigate change. It isn't uncommon as we see with celebrity culture today. However, Paul mentions in a few songs, most notably Too Many People and Dear Boy, some phrases that John believed to be tongue-in-cheek references to him and Yoko. And as we get into it, if you start to feel like John was a bit paranoid and the lyrics weren't necessarily really for sure about him, you aren't alone. John self-admittedly said he was a jealous, insecure person, so it is indeed possible he was projecting, or being so self-absorbed that anything he read could be a reference for a jab at him. I'll lay it out, but see what you think. In Dear Boy, John believed Paul was referencing him as the lyrics mentioned, "I hope you never know, dear boy, how much you missed. And even when you fall in love, dear boy, it won't be half as good as this." Could be about Linda versus Yoko, Paul's new bandmates versus John, or not about John at all. Paul says it wasn't, but in Too Many People, Paul fully admits he took a direct swing at John and Yoko for their holier-than-thou approach to activism, stating, "I was looking at my second solo album, Ram, the other day, and I remember there was one tiny little reference to John in the whole thing. He'd been doing a lot of preaching, and it got up my nose a little bit. In one song I wrote, 'Too many people preaching practices,' I think is the line. I mean, that was a little dig at John and Yoko. There wasn't anything else on it that was about them. Oh, there was You Took Your Lucky Break and Broke It in Two. I felt John and Yoko were telling everyone what to do, and I felt we didn't need to be told what to do. The whole tenor of the Beatles thing had been like, each to his own, freedom. Suddenly it was, you should do this. It was just a bit of that wagging finger, and I was pissed off with it. So that one got to be a thing about them." In an interview with the press, John did seem to figure out the less vague jab and responds, "I heard Paul's message in Ram. Yes, they are there, dear reader. Too many people going where? Missed out on lucky what? What was our first mistake? Can't be wrong. Huh? I mean, Yoko, me, and the other friends can't be all hearing things." John didn't waste any time swinging back before he penned the infamous How Do You Sleep by lambasting Paul's second album, stating, "I thought Ram was awful. McCartney was better because at least there were some tunes on it, like Junk. I like the beginning of Ram On, the beginning of Uncle Albert, and I like some of My Dog's Got Three Legs. I like the little bit about Hands Across the Water, but it just tripped off all the time. I didn't like that a bit." So John comes out swinging for the fences after discovering Paul's little commentary and in the schoolboy fashion creates How Do You Sleep, where the references are as deep cutting as they are on the nose. In it, John says all Paul's ever done of worth was writing Yesterday, that his music was muzak to John's ears, meaning trite elevator nonsense, mentioning that Paul might have actually been dead all along like the conspirators have been mentioning, and that Paul insulated himself from the real world by surrounding himself with sycophantic yes-men that waited on his every word. Paul rebuts, "So what if I live with straights? I like straights. I have straight babies. It doesn't affect him. He says the only thing I did was Yesterday. He knows that he's wrong. He knows, and I know it's not true." But John was out for vengeance, in one take saying, "Tell me, how do you sleep, you?" But to avoid a libel suit from Paul, Alan Klein, who you might remember as one of the most awful people on the planet who basically lit the powder keg that blew up the already frenzied Beatles, suggested leaving expletives out of it. John said he didn't want to be obscure like how Paul was being with his lyrics, so he wrote down and sang exactly what he wanted to say. The creation of the song in the studio was brutal, and what's more tragic is that Ringo and George Harrison were there watching as Yoko would race back and forth to write a nasty comment about Paul, wave the paper frantically and gleefully bring it to John, who would respond with his own insult, and they'd burst into laughter. Felix Dennis, who was present for all of this, mentions that some of it was absolutely puerile. Thank God a lot of it never actually got recorded because it was highly personal. Like a bunch of schoolboys standing in the lavatory making scatological jokes and then falling about with laughter at their own wit. That was about the level of it, but thank goodness in the end somebody obviously talked some sense to them, or they'd talk sense to each other. Maybe Ringo had gotten to them and told them not to be so brutal. Some of the lyrics were a lot ruder than you will find on the final version. It went on for so long about Paul, their friend, brother, family, that Ringo had to say something. He was the most critical of John and Yoko's carrying on. Ringo was fuming and livid, and at one point stood up and said, "That's enough, John." The song comes out and Paul is hurt. Maybe one could say devastated. Arguably a person like Paul, who wrote so many songs that uplift people and bring happiness, was out of his depth with this kind of mudslinging. Paul says, "When John did How Do You Sleep, I didn't want to get into a slanging match. And I'm so glad now, particularly after his death, that I don't have that on my conscience. I just let him do it because he was being fed a lot of those lines by Klein and Yoko. Part of it was cowardice. John was a great wit, and I didn't want to go fencing with a rapier champion of the East Cheam. That was not a good idea. And I also knew that those vibes could snowball, and you start off with a perfectly innocent little contest, and suddenly you find yourself doing duel to the death with the Lennon figure, and it's, oh my God, what have I carved out here?" But it meant that I had to take shit. It meant that I had to take lines like "all you ever did was yesterday." I always find myself wanting to excuse John's behavior just because I loved him. It's like a child. Sure, he's a naughty child, but don't you call my child naughty. Even if it's me he's shitting on, don't you call him naughty. That's how I felt about this and still do. I don't have any grudge whatsoever against John. I think he was a sod to hurt me. I think he knew exactly what he was doing, and because we had been so intimate, he knew what would hurt me and he used it to great effect. I thought, keep your head down and time will tell, and it did, because in the Imagine film, he says it was really all about himself. John did clear the air saying it was really about himself, saying, "It's not about Paul, it's about me. I'm really attacking myself, but I regret the association." Well, what's to regret? He lived through it. The only thing that matters is how he and I feel about these things, and not what the writer or commentator thinks about it. Him and me are okay. Wow, okay, that was brutal. The next few aren't so bad. So as we know, John loved to condemn many of the past Beatles songs as granny music, puppy love tunes, etc. And that carried on towards Paul's solo career, not only from John, but critics of Paul in general, which is weird because the man did write Helter Skelter, like relax. But in his rebuttal to John's criticism, Paul mentions in his song that he doesn't really give a damn, and if he wants to write happy love songs that bring people joy, he's going to, by saying, "Well, what's wrong with that? I'd like to know, because here I go again." The song ended up staying 5 weeks on Billboard's Hot 100 and was the #1 pop song in their 1976's year-end chart, so evidently people did want to fill the world with silly love songs. Paul says, "I was getting slagged off for writing love songs. You see, I'm looking at love not from the perspective of boring old love. I'm looking at it like when you get married and have a baby. That's pretty strong. It's something deeper. For me, that's what always makes me write the next love song. That I love it. I don't mind being sentimental. I love the old movies. I've never been too ashamed of all that stuff." Everybody loves George Harrison, and his song All Those Years Ago takes us on a beautiful reminder of his time with John Lennon. Originally written for Ringo, George rewrote the lyrics after John Lennon's assassination, recorded the vocals himself, and remarked on how he looked up to his friend. Referencing John with lyrics like talking all about how to give, they don't act with much honesty, but you point the way to the truth when you say all you need is love. Living with good and bad, I always looked up to you. Now we're left cold and sad. Truly heartbreaking. And what's more is that this song was the first recording that George, Paul, and Ringo did together since the Beatles broke up. In this fact, we see how music was an escape for George as he dealt with the tragic loss of his friend. It is said that when George heard the news about John, he was in his kitchen, white as a sheet. He had breakfast and spoke to Paul and Yoko on the phone, which lifted his spirits a bit, and he ran to the studio to begin working, perhaps to channel his heartbreak into something, as his friends that were near kept his wine glass full all day. Ringo had his fair share of songs for the Beatles, and this one is a personal favorite of mine, if at least because it's so sweet and cheerful, and you guys know how much I love good cheer, yeah? So in Ringo's song Early 1970, our favorite drummer dedicates each verse to his best friends, and they're just perfect. First up is Paul, with Lives on a Farm, got plenty of charm, beep beep. He's got no cows, but he's sure got a whole lot of sheep, and brand new wife and a family, and when he comes to town, I wonder if he'll play with me. Then it's John, which is devastatingly hilarious, laying in bed, watching TV, Cookie, with his mama by his side. She's Japanese. And they scream and they cried. Now they're free. And when he comes to town, I know he's going to play with me. Oh my God, Ringo is ridiculous. Next, he remarks on Georgie Boy and his sprawling mansion Friar Park and his love for spirituality, stating, he's a long-haired, cross-legged guitar picker, with his long-legged lady in the garden picking daisies for his soup, a 40-acre house that he doesn't see because he's always in town playing for you with me. And of course, in Ringo's humble way, mentioning his lack of melodious prowess with a, I play guitar ADE and I don't play bass because that's too hard for me. I play the piano if it's in C. And when I go to town, I want to see all three. Why, Lord, why is Ringo so amazing? And when will I know this power? George's When We Was Fab is astounding, and rightfully so. Not only was it written by the man who brought us Here Comes the Sun, Something, and While My Guitar Gently Weeps, but it was also produced and co-written by the legendary Jeff Lynne, and it shows. I swear, it's like a Beatles song mixed with an ELO, and it's everything I ever wanted. George reflects on the harrowing days of Beatlemania in the 1960s, and every single trick in the Beatles book was thrown at this song, featuring the psychedelic splendor of the sitar, cellos, and of course, backwards effects. Even Ringo had to join in the festivities down memory lane, and it remains one of George Harrison's most popular solo songs. George hadn't had a lot of luck when it came to business dealings. He witnessed his income be picked apart by taxes, so he wrote Taxman, and then his issue with licensing companies, so he wrote Only a Northern Song, and of course the lawsuit of My Sweet Lord. It would seem he couldn't get a break, and nothing loomed worse for him than the business side of the Beatles. So George wrote Sue Me, Sue You Blues. Much like his song, This Song, George directly comments on the lunacy in his legal struggle, mentioning its affidavit swearing time. Sign it on the dotted line. Hold your Bible in your hand. Now all that's left is to find yourself a new band. For the quiet Beatle, George sure knew how to roast some people in his music. On George's triple album, All Things Must Pass, which is basically a Beatles album if you consider how many of those songs were written during their time together, George pens Run of the Mill as a pure reference to the toll of running Apple Corps was taking on the relationships within the band. This song exists as the emotional understanding of what it was like to see the Beatles ripped apart, whether by money, creative differences, or just falling out of love with one another. The title is a play on the phrase trouble at the mill, which is a Northern English term for conflict at the local factory. And as Paul was becoming a more and more slick businessman, even Derek Taylor mentioning he was the bossiest of bosses and bringing in his in-laws as potential financial advisors, George had it with this power grab, stating in the lyrics, everyone has choices when to and not to raise their voices. It's you that decides which way you will turn, while feeling that our love's not your concern. It's you that decides. Perhaps it wasn't directly about Paul, but maybe about everything that was going on. But Paul was the most aggressive in the end with business, so it's not hard to link the two together. In his debut album, John was quite keen on expressing the finality of the Beatles chapter and other parts of his life, directly stating, I don't believe in Beatles, just believe in me, Yoko and me, John says. I don't know when I realized I was putting down all these things I didn't believe in. I could have gone on. It was like a Christmas card list. Where do I end? Churchill? And who would I have missed out? It got like that, and I thought I had to stop. I was going to leave a gap and say, just fill in your own, for whoever you don't believe in. It just got out of hand. But Beatles was the final thing, because it's like I no longer believe in myth. And Beatles is another myth. I don't believe in it. The dream's over. And I'm not just talking about the Beatles is over. I'm talking about the generation thing. The dream's over. And I have personally got to get down to so-called reality. For this fact, I really don't want to get into the way of how beautiful this song really is. A man lost his best friend and brother, and so many years later, after all that pain and rage they had, they still remained friends till the end. So for this one, I'll just read Paul's quote about it, and that'll be that. Paul says, I was kind of crying when I wrote it. It's like a dialogue with John. One of my feelings, even when he was to lay into me, was that he really didn't mean it. I could always see why he was doing it. There was a spectrum of me, which I understand because he had to clear the decks just like I did. In the song, John would hear me saying that and say, oh, piss off, you don't know me at all. We're worlds apart. You used to know me, but I've changed. But I feel that I still knew him. The song is me trying to talk back to him, but realizing the futility of it because he is no longer here. And even though that's a fact I can't quite believe, even to this day, the I love you part was hard to say. A part of me said, hold on, wait a minute, are you really going to do that? I finally said, yeah, I've got to. It's true. As they say, time heals all wounds. I hope that we can all find the wisdom to forgive each other for the mistakes we've made in the past and try to let things go. I do hope you enjoyed the video and the stories I told you here. I hope that they can inspire you in your life, how you react to things, how quick you are to forgiveness, how useless being cruel can really be. My dad always told me, tomorrow is promised to no one. We are who we choose to be, so choose.